So, is it okay to feel as peer supporters even once we're recovered? Well, this talk is about recovery, what self or wellness might look like, and how that self or wellness sense might change over time and with experience. At its core, it's a shouted plea that peer support workers stay authentically connected to their messy feelings. Oh, hi, my name's Peter Temple, and my feelings leak out my face. Yours probably do too, because tears are part of processing. Weird then that feelings leaking out of your face can be frowned on when we work in mental health. Now, resilience to me is about feeling feelings. It helps because if I can touch the emotion, I can discharge it. But if I'm avoiding touching my feelings, busily pretending I'm fine, I'm probably not very well at all. In fact, there's an acronym in Narcotics Anonymous that says, I'm fine people are actually fucked up, insecure, needy, and emotional. In that fraternity, the way to wellness is through fineness, by sharing stories. Today, I'd encourage you to own your own level of fine. As we go through, if your feelings end up on your cheeks, or if they don't, try to spot any judgment thoughts around feelings that come up for you. And if you see other people feeling their feelings, please be supporters of that bravery. Showing and sharing our feelings encourages connection and understanding, which for me is the bedrock of mental wellness. Importantly, this presentation discusses self-harm, and there are people here who will find that affects them more than it does others. Please feel free to do whatever you need to keep yourself safe, including taking space away from the talk. Now, my experience is probably more often labelled personality disorder than feelings falling out of your face disorder, quite sadly. And everyone here will have their own, probably slightly unique idea of what it means to have a personality disorder. Those ideas might not even be totally conscious. They will have developed from partly what you've learnt, partly what you've seen and experienced, and partly what you've heard or the culture around personality disorder where you live or work. Now, this presentation is part of a series aimed at changing attitudes to personality disorder. And to do that, I believe that we have to have the courage to show up and be seen. And this leads me to a favourite quote of mine by Brené Brown, which essentially says that courage starts with showing up and letting ourselves be seen. Now, in the spirit of that, I'd like to introduce you to myself as rather a vulnerable service user. Now, I've got so much feeling for the self in me, or the self or version of me that's in this film. She's bloody marvellous. Being willing to sit in that discomfort, in all that messy feeling, just to share this story of thanks to services and hope for others. Let's have a look at what I've got to say back then. I think this was taken in 2014, and it was taken right after I'd finished a course of dialectical behavioural therapy. It was my letter to other people who were thinking about taking therapy on as an option. Maybe I can't fix the whole world, but I can fix my world. It was pretty daunting starting dialectical behavioural therapy, but this was the last chance saloon. I was self-harming to such an extent that by accident or design, probably not too far into the future, I was going to kill myself. I came into it from a very dark place, full of self-hatred, fear and hopelessness. When my therapist, Alan, offered me a place on the course, he asked me to sign a contract saying I'd stick with it for 12 months. He seemed to think this would be enough to make me stay on the course. But what was he going to do if I didn't show up? Sue me? No, what kept me coming back was the fact that as dark as it was where I was at that time, and even though what I was doing to myself was likely to kill me, I hadn't actually given up. I wanted to live. I wanted to believe that there was a life for me after self-harm and suicide attempts.
I've had 3 years of various therapies. DBT made up the last year of that and was the only one that really made any impact on my thinking. Just for the record, I hated it. It was really hard. It made me think, it made me cry lots. I wanted to quit so many times. Sorry. Some weeks it was even impossible to make myself go. And I certainly had long periods throughout the year when I didn't think I was making any progress at all. I felt all that and I kept doing it anyway. They don't make promises in therapy, but Alan said that the goal was to find a life worth living. I figured if there was even a slight chance that this therapy could transform my bleak landscape into a life worth living, it had to be worth a shot. Our hardest session was when he asked me to close my eyes and just sit with the pain. I'd been avoiding emotional pain for years, using sex, drink, drugs, and eventually self-harm. Needless to say, I wasn't all that thrilled about the idea of sitting with it sober. Although I only did it for about 15 minutes, I thought I'd drown. I didn't. Alan wouldn't have let me. He showed me how to use DBT to confront my suffering. He taught me to swim even when life's current was flowing against me. He gave me tools and showed me how to use them. He didn't do any of it for me, but he was about the best teacher I could have hoped for, and I still use the skills he taught me every single day. DBT is about accepting that you can't change what went before. You don't have to like it or approve of it, but you can't change it. How you react to it and what happens next, though, that's all on you. For me, it's the end of the course, and a year later, I still hate therapy, but I love what it's taught me and the person it's helped me become. I'm going to be okay. No, I am okay. For me, the keys were about not avoiding my feelings, going after the things in life that I found meaning in, and having the faith in the value of my own choices. That's manifested in all sorts of ways. I started my own furniture restoration business, and while it's hardly making me rich, I get by. I used to have a flash job and a flash car and a flash house. DBT helped me to see that I didn't really value those things, so they had little meaning to me. But it might teach you that you do value those things and help set you on the path to getting them. The other thing they're big on in DBT is that there is no one right answer. What's the meaning of life? Whatever you want it to be. That's the dialectic. That's DBT. I've helped open a bee sanctuary, started a charity that helps addicts connect socially in sobriety, and I'm currently on a community art project entitled Happy New Year Penzance from Your Homeless. These are the causes that are important to me, but I'm afraid you can't have one. You have to work out what yours are for yourself. That's hard. That's really hard. Therapy didn't give me a roadmap to follow, and creating my own was probably the hardest part. I so wanted someone to come along and say, just do X and Y and you'll be well. I got so frustrated that I didn't know what I wanted to do. What would keep my life meaning? It's very big questions. You know, it's big stuff that we're dealing with. I felt that if someone would just tell me the answer, we could all save ourselves a lot of time and effort. But even with all of his years of training, I doubt Alan would have said, you know what will make you feel like your life is worth something? Open a bee sanctuary. He didn't know me that well. Hell, when I started this process, even I didn't know me that well. So my advice to those starting out in DBT would be to make the most of the process. If you have even a tiny spark of interest in something, follow it up. I've tried lots of things throughout the year and more of them didn't fit for me than did. That's the nature of the beast. It's trial and error. You will find your groove if you keep looking for it. Keep doing the things that feel good, ditch the ones that don't, with the exception of the therapy itself, of course. That's not going to feel good. You will want to ditch it, skip sessions and drop out. Don't do that. Make yourself go the distance. Force yourself to participate, even when you don't want to, especially then. It is worth it. I'm upset now, but it's so worth it. If you put the effort in, you'll end up doing the things that will give your life meaning. It doesn't have to be starting your own business or doing charitable works. It might be swimming or dancing, saving for the trip to Italy you've always promised yourself, learning a new language or skill. I don't know what your solution will be, and neither does your therapist, but they will help you to work it out. And if you put the effort in, even on days your old coping mechanisms call so loud they're all you hear, you will come out the other end with a life worth living. I could never find the words to say thank you to the therapists who have helped me, mostly the wonderful Alan, without whom I'd almost certainly not be here today. But I don't need to find the words, I need to do the actions. I know Alan would agree, it's the most meaningful way to express myself. To you, as you begin your own brave journey, I would say a simple good luck. Once I would have signed off from a fellow sufferer, but I don't think of myself in those terms anymore. Today I'm a survivor. This evening, 1 week before I finished my DBT course, in a totally candid and unthinking moment, I heard myself say, I love you, and realised I was talking to myself. That's big stuff. If that's a feeling that you want, show up, do the work, cry, feel, sit with it, practice your skills. Try to take each day one moment at a time. Those moments will improve. Honestly, they will. You can build your own life living. You too will survive. Yours, Peter Temple, a BPD survivor.
Oh, now, let's all take a breath as we come back into the room after that. I really think that those pictures at the end help. Now, they help because they give me and potentially you an opportunity to reground and recenter as we come back into the room and process the emotionalness of that film. But also because I think that those pictures show the variety of things that was useful to me in my recovery that year. You know, services and therapy was a massive, massive part of that. But for me, equally important were my daughter and the things that we did together. That temperamental, stinky old generator going snowboarding has always been really big for me. Even pickling cauliflower, for heaven's sake. It all helped me get where I wanted to be. Now, on the surface, this me looks quite broken, quite vulnerable. But before I had this identity of personality disorder or patient, actually, I was pretty shiny. And yet, this version of me is undeniably the more well. Just goes to show how tricky this idea of self can be. So, here I am, being all shiny on the far right hand side there. That picture was taken in 2006, so some time ago now. And there I was, shiny, fabulous, glamorous, working in Australia and New Zealand, being flown around the world to events and showcases. I was on international judging panels for retail excellence. It all looked amazing. But that courageous, crying person that you met on the slide before has her shit way more together than this shiny one ever did. Shiny me was living too fast. There was a culture in the media of using drugs to keep going and to wind down. It was a familiar pattern for me. I wasn't new to using drugs to cope. I'd left England in response to a man I lived with, a friend of mine, dying of a heroin overdose. A local drug dealer I knew had just been sent down for 5 years. I'd managed to get an honours degree in journalism, and I took it and ran to a place where pay reviews were conducted in hotel bedrooms, and my boss tanked 3 months of my work by arriving to a client meeting high on crystal meth. I coped until I didn't. I drugged hard and I worked hard and I drugged hard and I worked hard and I put up with the tanked projects and the sorry pay reviews, and we worked and we worked and we networked and we took clients out in work time and to bed in our spare time, and it was all meaningless to me. So I crashed and I burnt and I landed back in Cornwall, abruptly stopping drugs. I started self-harming. It felt pretty similar in my body as the heroin. For me, the cost of being shiny was everything. I needed someone, anyone else, to put me back together again. And I'd lost all confidence in my own ability to do that for myself. So I started out here as this shiny person. I progressed to vulnerable and seeking. And then, something that this person in this picture would never have imagined, I progressed to passionate student nurse and healthcare educator. And that's the version of me that we meet next. Now, yes, all of those professionals that I met along my way kept telling me that they couldn't do recovery for me, but they showed up and they cared. And it turned out that's what I needed to start feeling whole again. That's what I'd ask of all of you. Show up, care. That's all you have to do. But this video does have some extra do's and don'ts that might be helpful for you. I've called it finding light in the dark places. What works when helping someone who self-harms? Self-harm is discussed in the video. So in the immortal words of Derry Springer, look after yourselves and each other.
Hello.
Oh, we do
My
want to
name's
start
Peter
this
Temple.
part way through. Just give me a second to cue us up here. There we go.
If I am an expert by experience, it's probably appropriate that I share some of that with you today. So I'm going to tell you 3 short stories. The first one happened one morning. I'd self-harmed in quite a bad way for me. I'd made a cut that was about 7 to 10 centimetres long on my forearm, and I'd gone through the skin, through the adipose tissue, into the meat of my arm below, and I'd cut blood vessel, bleeding pretty well. Now, on this particular morning, I happened to have a meeting with the nurse down at my local GP's office. Now, that is a great service. If you're working with somebody who's self-harming, get them linked up to those nurses down there. They can go through a program that helps with self-management, harm minimisation, can talk about wound care, risk minimisation, can give free steri-strips and wound pads. And what that does is it just slightly starts to shift that narrative, doesn't it? From one that's really punitive and self-punishing to one where you're starting to take responsibility for the choices that you're making, that I was making with my body. It was a really critical intervention for me, but on this particular morning, less skillful. So I wasn't prepared. I thought I was going to finish that cut. I thought it needed a bit more work on it. So I stuffed my sleeve with tissue paper and I turned up down at the local GP's and I showed her my other arm. And she looked at it and she said, "Fabulous, Miss Temple. This is all healing really well. It's coming together really nicely." She went through the intervention that she was going to do that day. And just as I was getting ready to leave, she said, "Well, I've got you here. Can I just have a look at your other arm?" Of course, the arm's come out, blood everywhere. And quite rightly, she sent me up to West Cornwall Hospital to get some stitches. Now, the lesson here is actually exactly the same as is in Helen Lee Savage's new I Cared and Shared suicide prevention training. And that lesson is always ask, have you done anything else to hurt yourself today? Now, Helen gives a really fabulous example of a nurse turning up to somebody's house, banging on the door, no response. So she sort of looks in the window and she sees a noose hanging in the hallway. Panic. So she's banging really hard. Now, unfortunately, the guy comes to the door. So she bustles in there. She says, let me make you a cup of tea. Let's have a chat. And they sit down and they have a beautiful person-centered chat. She negotiates to take that noose away. She rushes back to the office. She updates the guy's risk. She phones the home treatment team. She informs her manager. She does a really great piece of work. But as that guy is waving her off at the door, he thinks to himself, that nurse was lovely. She was so kind. Really wish that I could have told her I took 3 boxes of paracetamol before she got here. So always ask, have you done anything else to hurt yourself today? So off I went to West Cornwall. And I got there and sat down and the doctor looked at my arm and he looked me straight in the eye and he said, I don't waste anaesthetic on people like you. And he called over somebody else, a trainee doctor, and he said, these people like pain, so I give it to them. Now I sat there, silent and uncomplaining, while that guy stitched me up. Tears streaming down my face. I didn't say a word. The euphoria and adrenaline that goes with self-harm and largely protects us from a lot of that pain, and worn off by that stage. Just hurt. Now, people self-harm for a whole range of different reasons, and my reasons would not be the same as the next 6 people that you spoke to. However, I would guess that not one of those 6 people would say that pain that you give to yourself forms the same function as pain that somebody else gives to you, whether that's emotional or physical pain. What he did that day was an abuse, and it was an abuse of his power and of me as an individual. But it's really unsurprising that I didn't complain. The Francis report tells us that even people with, air quotes, legitimate physical illnesses, even their well relatives and friends with great interpersonal effectiveness skills, really struggle to complain in the face of substandard healthcare. Now I went home and I took out every single one of those stitches, because if they were representative of the care that was on offer at that stage, then I really didn't feel that I deserved it. Now, of course, his approach was devastating, but today it gives us a really great way to discuss the fact that that's not the way to validate somebody's distress. Now, it was that experience that made me so committed today to helping educate healthcare professionals to do better with people with this diagnosis. Now, conversely, I was at a service user meeting recently by the Bridge Collective, which is a really fabulous service users group up in Exeter. And if you're interested in service user movement, then they are the guys to look at. They're doing some fabulous work. And this lady came in and shared her story with us, and she was really generous in letting me pass it on to you guys today. And as she was telling her story, her body language changed. So she said, this day I'd made a big self-harm on my side. And it was so deep that I'd lost the razor blade within myself, and her shoulders have come up and her head's gone down, and she's had a shame reaction to this. And she described the fact that she was going to have to get medical attention for it. She knew that. So she turned up to the hospital and she said, I'm very sorry, I've done this to myself, and I'm really sorry, I'm going to need your help. Now, that lady got the same consistent message from the person who clerked her in, right through to the surgeon who eventually performed the operation to find and remove that razor blade for her. And that message was that she was just as deserving of care as would have been somebody who had arrived there following a road traffic accident. And I always get more emotional at that story than my own, because it's just so beautiful. For her, that happened 6 years ago, and she hasn't self-harmed since. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to solve it all with kindness, with Roger's empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard. But isn't it interesting how powerful the stories are that we tell about ourselves and about other people? That's why I see our role as being to help people reauthor their narratives, to help them build resilience and hope. Okay, so the second story. On this occasion, I was in rehab. And rehab's very happy clappy. It's about doing the next right thing. It's about joining in, being part of it. And on this particular morning, the joining in that they wanted me to do was a physical exercise class. Now, I was a lot thinner then. I was just coming off drugs. Still, though, I couldn't do it. Found it really, really difficult. Just said, I'm really struggling here, guys. And they said, look, think this is a behavioural rather than a physical problem. You're actually kind of team splitting here because you don't want to do it. Mary doesn't want to do it now, and John doesn't want to do it. You're 2 weeks away from completing this rehab. If you want to continue with this program, you're going to have to do this class. So I struggled through it. I did it. It was a physical thing. I got home 2 weeks later. About a week after that, I had a stroke. Now, before they could treat that stroke, they had to give me 2 blood transfusions. And they had to do that because to deal with the emotional of being in rehab, I'd been bloodletting quite significantly. Nobody was asking me those questions. Ad Action was commissioned for my mental health. That was the part of me that they were looking to help. At that stage, and I believe that their practice has changed significantly since then, but at that stage, my CPN wasn't invited in to come and see me and check how my mental health was going. It was a very compartmentalised healthcare system that we had. And what I hope that we're going to do through presentations, through this, through campaigning, through you guys working really hard out there, is to create a more joined up service where that sort of thing doesn't happen anymore. Because if we can do that, then we're going to allow people to take that full, whole person, holistic, biopsychosocial approach to health that we all know we should be working towards. So the message is ask. If somebody's self-harming or cutting, don't be afraid to ask those questions about when, where, how much, how long, how deep. Really get to the bottom of it and get a physical done. People with personality disorder live 18 to 19 years less than the average person. And a big contributor to that is the fact that they're not getting their physical health needs taken care of. No, it's also worth saying, I had that stroke on a Thursday night. I had this funny turn and thought, if that happens again, better tell somebody. I'd noticed that things weren't quite right. I couldn't roll a cigarette. I'd been smoking since my teens. That should have been something that was quite easy for me to do. I was tipping a cup of water in the kitchen, and I can remember thinking, I used to tell my aunt to move. I can't right that cup. Now, my mum came round on the Saturday. As I said, it had happened on the Thursday. World was very small. Didn't have any interaction with anybody in the intervening time. One of the first things she said to me was, Pete, are you drunk? I said, no, Mum, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm not drunk. What I think's happened is I've had a stroke. And when I said it, I knew that it was true. There was a genuine problem. It wasn't just all in my head. But by that stage, I totally bought into that narrative that I was manipulative, attention-seeking, probably just making it all up. Even I didn't believe my own inner voice anymore by that stage. Now, I did get great help from services. DBT almost unquestionably saved my life by teaching me new ways of being, doing, thinking that led me out of that really dark place that I found myself in. But just because I felt as if things were improving, that doesn't mean that the diagnosis magically disappears. Personality disorder is a really sticky label. Once you've got it on you, it's really hard to take it off again. My first year of being a student nurse, I was doing fabulously. I was getting great marks. I'd made loads of friends. I hadn't had friends for years. I hadn't had friends for about 10 years. It's a huge, huge thing for me. I had been told by my lecturers that my lived experience was going to make me more empathetic as a practitioner. It was going to really serve me in my practice. Basically, I was on fire at that stage. However, first placements got released. My first placement was down at Belitho, the CMHT that had been looking after me during my most ill times. So I was going to be working alongside my psychiatrist, one of my old CPNs who had seen me in that stage of cutting, burning, setting fire to myself. They'd been round to my house during that time. They'd seen me at my very worst. And I wasn't entirely sure how they were going to react to me being on their side of the table at this stage. I was nervous. I thought what would be skillful would be to go to the GPs and get a prescription for some beta blockers. A DBT ninja would probably say radically accept that. They would probably say sit with it, practice your mindfulness. But I wasn't that skillful at that stage. I'd certainly aspire to be there. I'm not sure that I'm there yet. I went in there. I used my dear man. So that's describe, express, assert, reinforce, mindfully, not aggressive, negotiate. I did all of that stuff. And he went, yes, you can have the prescription. Awesome. But as he was writing that prescription, he said, now, this is a grown-up medicine. I'm going to have to trust you to be a good girl. Because if you make an attempt on this, it will actually kill you. Now, for him, that was probably ticking a box of risk. For him, that was probably just, yeah, right, told her that, out she goes. For me, I walked into that room, a student nurse on fire, and I walked out a PD. Worse than that, I walked out a PD likely to make an attention-seeking overdose. So remember, when you think it's only a word, it's just between us staff. Words are just 7% of our communication, but wow, how powerful they are when we use them to frame somebody else's difficulties, when we use them to frame somebody else's sense of self and who they are as a person. That's why, as professionals, we're obligated to choose them with such care. Because when we author stories about somebody, our words can become their own. So choose yours with kindness and use them to instill hope. Now, what I hope I've conveyed so far is that attention can be exactly the right sort of medicine for this group of people. Sadly, what we might not be doing is asking for the right sort of it at the right time and in the most skillful of ways. So we, as service providers, need to be asking those questions. A recent audit I did for the home treatment team found that just 6 people on caseload over a period of 3 months took a combined 44 overdoses that they didn't report to a soul until I phoned them up and said, so have you taken any overdoses that you haven't reported? One girl I spoke to said, take about 3 or 4 a week. I said, oh, when was the last time you took one? She said, oh, yesterday, I think, just before I saw my CPN. Did you tell her? She said, no. I said, do you like her? She said, yeah, she's really cool. This is not a relationship issue. Don't shy away from those direct questions about self-harm and suicide because you might just save a life. 10% of people with this diagnosis are thought to complete suicide. And if they aren't asking for help or the right sort of help, then it is up to us to be asking those questions. One of the things that was really helpful for me was Frankel's logotherapy, logo meaning, finding meaning in your life. But Frankel's quite a tough old guy. He's a Holocaust survivor. And his sort of central premise is to ask the person, what's got meaning for you? What are you doing to get more of that in your life? What else could you be doing? It's challenging. If you're going to be asking people those questions, then you need to be doing it in the spirit of those core conditions of empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard, if they're going to be useful for the person that you're trying to help. So what helped for me? Well, I started taking responsibility for my actions precisely because my distress was being validated. Somebody said, I see you. I see what's going on with you. I can see your pain. Again, that was a big moment in my life. And what that did was it allowed me to start approaching, trying to make a difference in my life, trying to do things differently to get something else. I started off with the really well-known therapeutic intervention of the car boot sale. And I took a step care approach to my recovery. I started going as a seller, challenged myself, stay there for 20 minutes, don't speak to anybody, it's fine. I got quite good at that. I developed what Marshall Linehan would call mastery. So I started going there and I had to ask 2 people how much something was. Just 2 people. So I've never carried so much cash in my life as I did at that time. I was terrified that I would have £3 in my pocket and somebody would say £4. That would have been catastrophic to me at the time. But I got good at it. I started going as a seller. Eventually I bought a generator, I hired a shipping container, I started sanding down furniture and selling it on Facebook. I opened a bee sanctuary a bit further on. Now, I don't believe that there was ever a clinicians meeting where those guys sat around a table and went, Peter's doing all right at car boot sales. I think bee sanctuary's next on her list. You know, that didn't happen. So if you are going to take this values-based approach to helping, don't assume that you know what somebody's life worth living might look like. Excuse me. Talk to them in open dialogic spaces. Help them identify those sorts of things. My therapist firmly felt that I was the expert on me. And to his credit, it took him a couple of years, but he convinced me of that in the end. It was him that encouraged me to go into nursing. And as I've said, that first placement really encouraged me to be quite open about my mental health because I was kind of outed before I'd even got there. And despite all of that stuff, I'm not stood here today in front of you saying fixed, ta-da, all better now. Where you or I sit on that spectrum depends. It depends daily, and it depends on things like our stress in that moment and our vulnerability to that stress in that moment. Some days we are going to be on fire. Other days and other moments, less so. But Pat Deegan says that's grand. It's about embracing our very human fallibility. It's not about becoming normal. For all of us, if we want to improve our position on that spectrum, Ryle says it's about bringing those behaviour patterns to awareness so that we can decide to do things differently. It's about having Linehan's willingness to approach that idea, because if we always do what we've always done and we don't like what we've always got as a result of that, then perhaps we will have the willingness to make changes, to try and do something different. It's about finding the bridges that connect us instead of the walls that divide. And you really don't have to be a therapist to see that as a rationale to work towards. But for the message to be heard, it must be delivered with Roger's empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard, with Linehan's loving kindness, with Barker's person-centeredness and Deegan's humanness. Because, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, much of our success with this group of people is going to come down to our attitude. And that in mind, I'm going to close with this quote, which has been attributed to Thich Nhat Hanh on empathy. And he said, when you plant lettuce, if it doesn't grow, you don't blame the lettuce. You look for the reasons it's not doing well. Might need fertiliser, more water, or less sun. But you never blame the lettuce. Thank you, guys. Hello.
Now, what I think that video shows is that the political is always personal, and culture is rarely as overtly stated as "I don't waste anaesthetic on people like you." Examples of this are when I was a student nurse, I had a mentor who was also a nurse who'd been directly involved in my treatment. I know that that man cares about me, and yet he said, "Show up as a nurse in this placement. It'll be safer." In the same place, I commented that one of the other nurses had a black eye. Another person said, "Yeah, I think he and his wife drink a lot. He's often a bit banged up." The tone said, "We absolutely cannot talk about that." Why? Is it really terrifying that a colleague might need help and support? A culture of silence is insidious. Improvements to language and perceptions of what it's okay to talk about at work are important, because otherwise don't we sound dangerous? In my professional life as a nurse, I've heard us called attention-seeking, faking it, risky, manipulative, team-splitting drama queens. And it may be a defence, but I actually think that we sound like quite a lot of fun. There is a darker side to this, though. Obviously, those things are wounding terminology. And it creates a culture. So I've seen a Facebook nursing post that asked, "I've been asked to work with someone with personality disorder. They've made allegations before. Am I entitled to refuse to work with this person to protect my registration?" If it stays that dangerous to be unwell, how will we ever start authentic supervision conversations about wellness? Jobs like mine, jobs like yours as peer support workers, allow us to help people on both sides of the table to be more open and honest about mental health. But we, as lived experience practitioners, have to hold on to our honesty, our authenticity, and our courage so that we don't fall into that trap of being silently fine. So, yes, please feel. Being fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional is all just part of the human condition. Normalising that by sharing our feelings is the fastest way to find community and solutions to personal worries, whatever they may be. The stress bucket is a great analogy for this. Your vulnerability to stress is demonstrated by the size of the bucket. You get a bigger bucket if you eat right, sleep right, take your meds as prescribed, all of the DBT please skills. Your stress goes into the bucket. If that overflows, then you've got problems. You start snapping at the people that you love or the people that you're working with. Not good outcomes. So, to alleviate the pressure in the bucket, to reduce the level of the stress in the bucket, we try and turn on the tap with some good coping skills. Bad coping skills tend to flow out of the tap and back up to fill in the bucket again. So, bad coping skills would have been my previous affection for drugs, my current affection for cigarettes. Probably all of us, or most of us, have had instances where we've drunk too much. All of that coping that feels as if it's a positive actually just puts water back into our bucket, or stress back into our bucket. My advice to you as peer support workers is talk about the feelings that come up in relation to this challenging, rewarding work of ours. Do that with your supervisor. Avoid confidential detail, obviously, but also talk to your friends and the people who love you about how it's affecting you. That way, you can look at how you can increase the flow out of your own stress bucket. Yoga might be for you, mindfulness, dancing. Maybe especially as peer support workers, the fastest way to overflow your bucket is to keep being fine in silence. Now, if you have been affected by anything in this presentation, please talk to the people who care about you. Thank you very much for listening. I've been Peter Temple from Cornwall Partnership Trust, lived experience practitioner. Thank you.